After first being announced in 2019, back when Hollywood was all in on girl bosses, the first episode of Dune Prophecy, originally called Dune Sisterhood, is now out. A whopping 5 years later. And if there ever was a female-centric series that came out at the wrong time, it is this one. Let's dive in. If the Dune franchise fails, it will be because of Hollywood's ideological capture and adherence to the identitarian ideology bordering on quasi-religion, as pertains to diversity and inclusion, and especially female empowerment. Look, I'm a big fan of the original Dune, and I know perfectly well that strong, independent women are a big part of Dune. That is a point I have made myself. In some sense, Dune is and always was about the women, especially with the Bene Gesserit sisterhood of space witches seeking power. Right after the Acolyte and Agatha all along, and just before the Witches of Oz in Wicked. Talk about the power of... Well, at least these witches, for the most part, aren't lesbian, but still at some point, it's time to read the room. In fact, that time is way overdue. As I stated at the time of its release, my only real issue with Dune Part 2 was the handling of the character Chani, portrayed by Zendaya. And to be clear, I'm not talking about Zendaya's performance here, but the creative decision that this Chani couldn't handle Paul Atreides conducting a pro-forma sexless marriage with Irulan Corrino in order to secure a political union. Instead, she stormed off into the desert like the empowered Karen she was reimagined to be, in the process throwing all Dune books from that point onwards out the window. To me, that utterly ruined what otherwise was a flawless movie. I don't ever need to rewatch it, because it fell apart in the final act, and I am significantly less interested in Dune Part 3 as a result. So, why was this inexcusable creative change made in the first place? Because of girl bossness and empowerment and all of that. It was, after all, made when the woke mind virus had a chokehold on Hollywood, and sadly, Dune Prophecy was developed during that time frame as well. Dune Prophecy, originally titled Dune Sisterhood, based on the 2012 novel Sisterhood of Dune by Brian Herbert and Kevin J. Anderson, was first announced in 2019 when Ansarnoff was ultimately calling the shots at Warner. Now, of all of the Dune books at their disposal, I don't know for certain that it was her call to adapt specifically Sisterhood of Dune. But as we have covered in earlier videos, Ansarnoff was very much so the Kathleen Kennedy of Warner, so if it wasn't her call, someone certainly did read the political situation in the room at the time of presenting the pitch to her. Because she was all about diversity, equity and inclusion, and especially female overrepresentation. So if there was one Dune project she was guaranteed to sign off on, it was Sisterhood of Dune. I mean, as we covered at the time, she was the one who mandated that DC be made female-centric, and both Batman and Superman be replaced with Supergirl and Batgirl to that end. Which indeed was the intention until David Zaslav stepped in and scrapped Supergirl mid-filming, in the process ending what would have been a very long tenure for Sasha Calle as the Superman replacement. For Dune, however, there was no such rescue, and indeed, early in its development, this female-centric series was criticized for not having enough female representation in the writer's room, a criticism the powers that be took very seriously, for what followed was years' worth of development hell as mostly female writers and showrunners, often of questionable qualifications, outside of being female of course, and often diverse on top of that, came and went. Finally, after several years in development hell, and a revolving door of female writers and showrunners coming and going, Dune Prophecy is finally here, and it couldn't have come at a worse possible time. Never mind that more and more seem to take issue with the canon ending of Dune Part 2, Over the past year, audiences worldwide, especially female audiences, have done something that was probably thought of as unthinkable back when this was being developed, in that they voted with their wallets against female-centric takes on male-driven franchises. Marvels, The Marvels, Madame Webb, Furiosa, A Mad Max Tale, and Borderlands all flopped. Big time. And I still believe the reason the Red Sonja remake hasn't found distribution yet, despite being filmed more than 2 years ago, is because no distributors want to bet on another girl boss movie in this climate. Sure, you can argue that Barbie was a massive hit, and the upcoming Wicked no doubt will be as well, but the built-in audience for those brands was predominantly female from the get-go, so different rules apply. Unfortunately for Dune Prophecy, no matter how important a role the women may have in the books, this day and age, the built-in predominantly male audience aren't going to flock to something like Dune Prophecy, especially not in light of all of the other witches that have been crammed down audiences' throats earlier this year, and they weren't welcomed then either. But of course, that only means the series has to win audiences over. If it's really good, it should be able to do that, right? So, what happens in the first episode? Well, we get introduced to these witches, and just how committed they are to gain power for power's own sake. And already in the first episode, we see this woman manipulate the Emperor to agree to marry his daughter to a boy who isn't merely underage, but literally a child. So yeah, I foresee that they might have something of an uphill struggle with the audience. So what am I saying here? Should they not have made a Sisterhood of Dune series? No, I'm not saying that. That is part of the expanded Dune universe, so I wouldn't have minded them making it at some point, but this wasn't the time. And here's the thing, a central plot element here is that this story takes place 10,000 years prior to the events of the Dune movie, and just decades after the frequently referenced War Against the Machines. So much emphasis is placed on that, in fact, that the first episode in part feels like a sequel to a movie or series that I haven't seen. I have no trouble following though, because I just so happen to have read the 3 books that make up the War Against the Machines trilogy. I've spoken of these books before, and while a little wordy and overly long at times, these are fantastic books, and they would make for a fantastic TV series, with content for at least 7 seasons easily.
When humans rose up against the thinking machines that had enslaved them, history says it was an Atreides who led them to victory.
That particular trilogy of books is honestly what sets the stage for the entire expanded Dune universe, and unless Dune Prophecy is a total bomb, I am sure it will be the subject of some kind of adaptation in the future. But in my opinion, there was no reason to wait. That was the series they needed to adapt right now. A Dune War Against the Machine series, if done right, would have been a huge hit, and open the door for a ton of spin-offs down the line, including a Sisterhood/Prophecy series. Instead, I worry that this series, having the misfortune of being a female-centric installment in a franchise with a predominantly male built-in audience, in a time when audiences everywhere, and female audiences in particular, have rejected just that. I worry that this might underperform badly enough to derail the entire Dune franchise. Or what do you think? Did you see this first episode? And if you did, what did you think about it? If you haven't seen it yet, are you excited to check it out? Or would a series on the War Against the Machines have been more interesting? Let me know your thoughts in the comments.